Hi, I'm Meshal Malik, and you're watching Indus Special. The violence and atrocities carried out in Indian-occupied Kashmir since the past decades are well documented. From the use of pellet guns to the detention of the Kashmiri people by India's forces without charge and without trial, essentially destroying millions of lives and thousands of families. There are no doubts that these acts of violence are a violation of international law. But what happened on the 5th of August by India scrapping Kashmir's special status is in many ways unprecedented. As we speak right now, Kashmir's people are once again being stripped of their right to healthcare, education, and the freedom of expression. And it is feared that the situation right now might be worse than it has ever been before. On today's show, we try to take a closer look at the impact of India's draconian laws in Indian-occupied Kashmir and the fears of what might be happening right now as the region is on lockdown. Joining us for this discussion today is Mr. Masood, the president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir. He's joining us from Islamabad. Thank you so much, Mr. Khan, for joining us, and welcome to the show. Now, as I said, what has unfolded in Kashmir over the past 17 days is unprecedented. Do you fear that the violence in Kashmir is also unprecedented right now?
Yes, it is. People are being killed, maimed, tortured. They are incarcerated in their own houses. Thousands of people have been detained. They've been kept in temporary shelters. And we think that a genocide is taking place under the cover of communication blockade. India invaded the occupied territory on August the 5th. And since then, it has been brutalizing our captive population, which is under siege. So this is unprecedented, as you have said. Let me also add that the Kashmiris have had no special status whatsoever since 1947. This Article 370 that we refer to, it was in fact a Faustian pact between Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. As far as the people of Kashmir are concerned, they were under occupation in 1947, and they have been under occupation of India for the past 72 years. What happened on August the 5th was that India took a step further and has tried to colonize them, to capture their territory, to take away their land and all their rights to permanent residence, to education, to employment, to acquisition of property. So this is practically colonization that has happened there.
Right. And Mr. Khan, let's dig deeper into that claim that this is essentially colonization. As you mentioned here right now, that they have never really had true autonomy. Article 370, scrapping it was almost as taking away a facade of there being any semblance of autonomy. But what did matter was scrapping Article 35A, which is leading to the fear that there will be widespread ethnic cleansing. Let's unpack that claim a little more. Tell us more about those fears.
It's not a fear. It has been substantiated by the international organizations. I can take you back to 1947. In 1947, the percentage of the Muslim population in Jammu was 61%. After a massacre that took place in November 1947, 237,000 Kashmiri Muslims were killed by Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the Maharaja's Army and Indian National Army, just in 1 month. And then they pushed about 500,000 people to Kashmir, to Azad Kashmir, to Rawalpindi, Sialkot and Lahore. So that's when the massacre or ethnic cleansing or genocide of Kashmiris started. Up to now, I think 500,000 Kashmiris have been killed. And there has been a pogrom of Kashmiris from time to time. This is the bigger reality that we face. Now, if you come to the steps that have been taken after August the 5th, what the Kashmiris are facing is that Hindus from all over India would be brought to the occupied territory and settle there. And these Hindus would come from Haryana, from Punjab, from Delhi, from Rajasthan, from Kerala, from Bengal and Bihar, from all over India. And this would change the political configuration of the occupied state, and this would also change their demographic composition. Let me add that before this step, although the occupied territory had a limited autonomy. They had a separate flag, a separate constitution, and a legislative assembly, but that has been demolished. The state has been bifurcated, and its status has been reduced to the status of a municipality. It is no more even a province. And this has all been done without the consent and concurrence of the people of Jammu and Kashmir.
Right. And as you've mentioned that this has been done without the consent of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, what's even more alarming is that we can't even hear what their opinions are in this case. We cannot even hear what any of their wills are because there's a complete lockdown. Now, given this and knowing that India's government is extremely belligerent and they are basically on this spree in which they're acting as if a rogue state is operating, what can be expected from them now in the future, in the coming days?
Well, more massacres, more brutalization. I can tell you that information has been coming out in bits and pieces, and we have some snippets, some footage somewhere, and according to the information that we have received, and as you have already pointed out, that this is very, very controlled information, 6,000 people have been detained, and they've been kept like animals in temporary shelters, and they've been deported to Delhi, in detention centers in Delhi. And even children have not been spared. Small girls have been subjected to torture and inhuman and degrading treatment in this crackdown. Let me also tell you that 10,000 people reportedly have come out in protest. And the reaction of the occupation forces was brutal. They used live ammunition, they used pellet guns, pepper grenades, and tear gas shells. And as a result, scores of people have been killed or critically injured. So this is the grim picture that you face in the Indian occupied territory. People have been forced to starvation because of prolonged curfews. Schools are empty. I mean, this last Monday, India tried to give to the world this impression that the situation is back to normal, and they opened 200 schools in Srinagar, and all those schools were empty because parents would not like to send their children to schools out of fear of their persecution or even murder of these children. So the situation is very bleak, and it is a wake-up call for the international community, for the United Nations Security Council. A genocide, a massacre is taking place, their eyes, and they have to intervene to stop this kind of brutalization of a whole population.
Right, and talking about the international community here, Pakistan also wants to take this case to the international in ICJ, and they want to take this issue on the basis of the human rights violations and the genocide that is ongoing. Now, what do you think will come out of that, and what do you foresee happening there?
You know, I would say that the primary responsibility in this regard is of the United Nations Security Council and other forums of the United Nations like the General Assembly and Human Rights Council. I mean, they must move proactively and try to prevent the massacre of the Kashmiris there. It is their responsibility. It is the responsibility of the Security Council in accordance with the United Nations Charter, in accordance with Article 1 of the United Nations Charter. This is the uppermost responsibility of the Security Council. And Pakistan did go to the Security Council and raise this issue, and we are grateful to the Permanent Five, particularly China, for standing by Pakistan and projecting the voice of the Kashmiris in the Security Council. So I would say that while Pakistan has decided to go to the International Court of Justice, the Security Council must continue to perform its responsibility, which is maintenance of peace and security in the region, also stemming and preventing a major disaster here in this region. I mean, a disaster like the one which happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Rwanda and Burundi and other parts of the world. So this is the responsibility of the Security Council. And they need not wait for a prodding or prompting from Pakistan or the Kashmiris. The United Nations Secretary General, in accordance with the UN Charter, particularly Chapter 6, should take his own initiative. He should use his good officers, and he should appoint a special envoy. But let me go to your question about ICJ. there are three things which need to be addressed. One is, of course, the ongoing massacre. The second is the illegal and unlawful steps that India took on August the 5th, and it is going to implement those decisions. And the third is the realization of the right to self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. What I would say that the ICJ could address the first and the second point, but not the third point, because self-determination has already been determined and mandated by the UN Security Council. On the first 2 points, the responsibility of the ICJ would be to prevent this kind of massacre, planned massacre or the genocide, and it should also give a judgment to reverse the illegal steps that India has taken, and it has called these steps its internal matter, which they are not. But let me tell you, let me add one point here, that it would all depend on the kind of brief that would be prepared by the Law Minister of the government of Pakistan and the Attorney General in consultation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Because, you know, this the legal course is a very slippery slope, and you have to be very careful, very meticulous in your preparations before going to any court, and for that matter, the international court, this
right.
ICJ.
Mr. Khan, just
yes.
here, following from everything that you're stating, and you're saying that there is a proactive role that needs to be played on the part of these international organizations. Now, as you also mentioned here, that India has claimed that this was an internal matter that, of course, got debunked when the United Nations Security Council had held a meeting on this very issue. But what kind of pressure is needed on India at this point in time? Because it has acted unilaterally in the case of Kashmir. They have violated several human rights conventions. They violated the Fourth Geneva Convention. Now, what sort of pressure is required?
The international media has already played its role. It is a very positive and constructive role. It has talked about the rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And ever since India took these unlawful steps, it has been supporting the stance taken by Pakistan directly or indirectly. Let me also tell you that in the past, the very media that we're talking about used to target Pakistan or criticize the people of Jammu and Kashmir and used to blame them of terrorism, committing acts of terrorism, because that media used to look at Jammu and Kashmir.
And Mr. Khan, what do you think the turning point was here for the international world to actually see the situation as it was and as it is right now?
I think that there are a number of factors. One is that although the governments, the major capitals, I mean the capitals of the Permanent Five or the Western countries are not speaking up, but they are speaking through the media. I know that the Western media is quite disciplined. It is free, but it is disciplined, and it understands the strategic implications of the steps that India has taken. It has imperiled the security of the entire region and of the world, as a matter of fact, because this is one factor. The other factor is that India's steps were so outrageous and aggravating that the international media had no choice but to report objectively this security lockdown, this clampdown, this blockade, communication blockade. This, in fact, focused the attention of the international media on what India was doing inside Kashmir.
Right. And
so
Mr. Khan,
I think these are...
sorry to interrupt there, but you've raised an essential point that when the outside world saw what was happening, because it was unprecedented and it was outrageous. Now, I do want to talk about the human cost of all of this, and I want to ask you, whatever tensions are arising at the line of control, how is that impacting the people there, and especially how is it impacting the people in Azad, Jammu and Kashmir?
Well, India has been targeting the people across the line of control for years. As a matter of fact, for the past several years, since Narendra Modi came to power in 2014, there has been this constant hostile fire across the line of control. But in the recent weeks, India has escalated the situation, and it has increased hostile fire across the line of control. And on our side, in Azad Kashmir, there are about 80,000 families or 540,000 people who are living in that territory, and they have been terrorized by Indian fire In the recent past, their hostile fire has claimed lives. Many people are injured, seriously injured. Houses have been destroyed, crops have been burnt, livestock has been killed. And let me tell you that they also used cluster munitions, banned cluster munitions, which have killed children. But let me tell you that the people of Azad Kashmir are very courageous, and they are ready to face this threat. They have always faced this threat with courage and valor. But let me add here that it is not just one war that India has unleashed. One war, I talked about it, has been unleashed against the people of the occupied territory, the second against the people of Azad Kashmir, and India has threatened Pakistan directly with nuclear weapons. So India is whipping up this frenzy, this war psychosis against Pakistan, against Muslims in Kashmir, inside India, and against Azad Kashmir.
Right. And Mr. Khan, now going back to the people there, and in 2016, after Burhan Wani's killing, there was a fresh wave of protests. You could see the indigenous movement in Indian-occupied Kashmir gaining momentum and strength. Now, what do you think is going to happen after this curfew is lifted?
We do not know. As a matter of fact, the reports that we have received, according to them, I mean, there's massive resistance in Ladakh, Jammu and Kashmir, in the 5 districts of Jammu and the entire valley of Kashmir. This resistance would continue. Let me divide the resistance into 2 parts. One is that after the martyrdom of Burhan Wani, there was this bunch of kids who drifted towards militancy. And then there are these 14 million people, or probably 10 million people of the Valley of Kashmir, who have steered a very peaceful movement against India. I mean, their voice is very loud and clear. They're saying that go India, go back, leave our Kashmir. But they haven't taken up the gun. Theirs is a peaceful movement. Of course, there's this militancy which is minuscule compared to what is happening in the entire territory of Jammu and Kashmir. And according to the statistics that were released by Indian occupation forces last December, the number of militants in the Indian occupied territory was not more than 250. And for them, they had to bring in or deploy additional 180,000 troops and 880,000 troops all put together. What I'm saying is that the face of the Kashmiri resistance is peaceful. But after India's actions and this aggressive attack against the very existence of the Kashmiri Muslims, it is possible that more young men who are being gunned down every day, they would tend to drift towards militancy, or we used to call them freedom fighters, but it is, let me add, is indigenous in character.
Mr. Khan, now let me just put my last question to you. We talked about the international community previously, and President of the United States, Donald Trump, also gave out a statement just recently where he offered another opportunity for India and Pakistan, where he said he would mediate. Now, in terms of this, what do you see happening in the coming days? Do you see more world powers stepping in, and do you see more powers offering mediation, and do you think India will take it?
You know, Pakistan and the people of Jammu and Kashmir have always welcomed mediation, third-party mediation, mediation by the United Nations, any type of conciliation, negotiations, regional initiatives, also good offices of the United Nations Secretary General. We have always welcomed that. But let me clarify a few points. You know, it is not an issue between India and Pakistan alone. There are 3 parties to the dispute: Pakistan, India, and the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And the people of Jammu and Kashmir are the key constituent, because they're the ones who have to decide about the political future of the entire state of Jammu and Kashmir. Second, I would say that the United Nations is also a party to the dispute, or at least a guarantor for the realization of the right to self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. So any mediation that is confined to Delhi and Islamabad would not work. Second point that I want to highlight here is that what President Trump is doing right now is not mediation. He is facilitating contact between India and Pakistan. And Pakistan has always been ready to talk to India, and India has been sabotaging any bilateral process, as a matter of fact. So the difficulties are
right, we can see the difficulties that are facing Pakistan in this regard. They are open to dialogue. They want a peaceful resolution to this situation, but that can only happen when India wants and is ready to do the same, is ready to come to the table. On that note, thank you so much, Mr. Masood Khan, the president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, for talking to us. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we're going to continue this discussion. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special as we talk about the ongoing human rights violations being carried out in Kashmir. Now we're joined by Dr. Sonya Saleem, who's a general physician, joining us from London. Dr. Ather Zia, she is the author of Resisting Disappearance, Military Occupation, and Women's Activism in Kashmir, and the founder and editor of Kashmir Lit and co-founder of Critical Kashmir Studies. She's joining us from Colorado. And Dr. Mudasir, Firdosi, a psychiatrist, joining us from London. Thank you all for joining us and welcome to the show. Dr. Saleem, now let me begin with you. As we're hearing in the news that there is a complete clampdown on life in Kashmir, everything has come to a halt. Now, talking about the healthcare facilities specifically, we are hearing of reports how the hospitals are empty because people can't access them. Now, take us through, as a doctor, in your professional expertise, what happens to a society when healthcare is denied, basic healthcare?
That's a very good question, actually. We often take healthcare for granted, especially in the UK, because, we've got the NHS. But essentially, if people cannot access healthcare, there is obviously a very real risk to mortality. So more and more people will die. If people do not have access to communications, for example, if they cannot call for an ambulance, then the longer the time the patient spends getting to hospital, the higher the risk of mortality and also the risk of morbidity. So these are potential complications. So if I give you an example of somebody who might be developing a stroke, so the management of a stroke is very time dependent, it's very time specific. And if we don't act in a prompt manner, if people cannot get to the hospital quickly, then these people are going to be left with numerous disabilities in the near future.
Right. So we're hearing about how reports in Kashmir there is blatant violence, but this is almost a more implicit form of violence when you're denying people to access emergency facilities when they need to. Now, Dr. Mudasir, Firdosi, talking about all of this, it's not just about the physical requirements of an individual which require healthcare. It's also the trauma that they face when they're in this distressing situation. Take us through it. What happens when there's a curfew, when you don't know whether your friends and family are alive? What could the trauma be like, and how would that have lasting implications?
So as you know, Kashmir has been in trouble from a long time, and already we knew from various studies that the incidence and prevalence of mental disorders is very, very high. Some studies suggest that almost 70% population has witnessed some kind of trauma, directly or indirectly. And if you take the current situation, the whole population is under trauma. Not only the people who live in Kashmir, it's also the Kashmiris like us who are not in Kashmir, but who are still in trauma because we can't get through loved ones. We don't know what's happening with them. I know many people outside who having breakdowns at the moment, panic attacks. People want to return and see their family as well. But people, there are also reports that 1 in 10 people has lost a loved one to the current struggle, and almost 1 in 3 has got someone in extended family who has been either killed or who is missing. So the trauma is pervasive, is everywhere, is in every home. And because of the uncertainty and how the situation is now and the curbs, I think people are being thrown into a situation of what we call as learned helplessness, where you treat an animal, you don't give them food, you don't give them access to anything. Then to get bare minimum, they do whatever you want them to do. So a situation is being created where people are being subjugated in a way, and I think it's being expected that they will then behave whatever we give them. For example, at the moment, people are not able to call their loved ones from Kashmir out. So at the moment, people have to go to police station, they have to queue there in line for hours.
Dr. Firdosi, now, sorry to interrupt here, but you've mentioned a point you said that there's learned helplessness, you don't know what to do. But do you think also that would result in increased agitation and people reacting in a more violent manner?
Well, it can go two ways. One is that some people would get more and more depressed, more withdrawn, more suicidal, or they will basically stop living, become vegetative. And some would probably react in the opposite way, and they will be more on streets, and it can lead to escalation quite clearly. And when you don't know what's going to happen next,
right.
I think is the typical reaction where either you run
right.
or you face the situation.
Right. So, Dr. Firdosi, hold on to that thought. I want to bring Dr. Zia into this conversation. Now, Dr. Zia, there's a term coined for Kashmiri women specifically, which is that of half widows. Almost 8,000 people in Kashmir reportedly have gone missing. They have disappeared. Their loved ones don't know if they're alive or whether they have been killed. Now, talking about this, how do you think that impacts not just a family, not just an individual, but a society at large?
Well, the phenomenon of half widows has been pervasive since more since 1989, when men, especially men from the age of 15 onwards up till the 25, and then now it's kind of like gone across the spectrum, when they were forcibly disappeared by the Indian government forces. And it's estimated that between 2,500 to 3,000 half widows exist in Kashmir right now. Most of what has happened is that their primary breadwinners, their husbands, they have been disappeared, and they don't know where they are. And many of them are part of the Association of Parents of Disappeared Persons. This is an organization of women that works and that struggles to find these disappeared men, and they have had no success so far. So what we find in these women, there are two organizations working with these half widows. This was a term coined by the Kashmiri media to describe these women whose husbands, they don't know whether they're dead or alive. So what we see is they show all signs of traumatic stress disorder, and there is no post there because they're still in trauma. They don't know whether their husbands are dead or they're alive. Same for the mothers. They don't know whether their sons are dead or alive. And for me personally, watching them have this protest since the early 90s in a public park, that kind of, led me to think about what has happened to these women. And it turned out to be my life's work because I worked on enforced disappearances. And I think that's what's happening to us as a society. We are traumatized by seeing this. And then for some of us, as Dr. Mudasir just put it, for some of us it becomes a helplessness, and for some of us we become agentive, like these women who haven't given up and they are continuing to search for their husbands. There are surveys which says that 91% of these women, they have refused to remarry, although the statutes for remarriage were changed for them by the Islamic jurists inside Kashmir. But they have refused to remarry, and they are taking care of their children, and they want to get them educated. So that's what's happening. It's kind of like everyone is trying to get by. Everyone is being agentive in face of this immense trauma that has happened.
Right. And Dr. Mudasir Firdosi, while we're talking about all of the trauma, how do you think this transfers into the coming generations, the youth specifically?
I think it is generational now, isn't it? So if we start from my grandfather to my father, me, and the next generation, clearly there is a shift. So the current generation is born in a state of trauma. They grow up with walking down barbed wires. They have to go to school through checkposts, and these curfews and crackdowns are ongoing. So all they see is an abnormal state of living. And they don't know what normal living would be, going to a park and playing with other children, how children outside Kashmir normally do things. So it clearly has had a deep impact on the whole psyche of the place. Right. And there is resentment, there is anger, and then that can lead to various issues, which has led also to, in some studies, that there's increase in substance misuse, which is self-medicating basically by very young children.
And Dr. Firdosi, you're saying here that the trauma that's being caused that ends in and results in other manifestations of it. Thank you so much for joining us and talking to us from London. That was Dr. Mudasir Firdosi. Now, Dr. Saleem, going to you and talking about this, I just want to read out a statement that was published in the Lancet British Journal that said the protracted exposure to violence has led to a formidable mental health crisis. Now, it's widespread, this mental health crisis. What would happen in the region in terms of the rates of people having to be admitted into hospitals, healthcare bills going up, when there is such a thick air of depression all around?
Yeah, sure. The thing is, there is already a level of stigma surrounding mental health illnesses, especially depression, psychosis. There's already some stigma in this country. I can imagine in India it's so much higher. So first of all, a lot of people actually don't seek help. They don't go to their doctors for fear of being ostracized by the community. However, if we did have the infrastructure in place, then if we don't have any doctors on the ground, if all the hospitals are empty, how on earth are we going to get these people treated? Because it's a multi-pronged approach. We not only have to rely on medication, so we've got medication to treat things like depression, PTSD, but it's also a lot more. It's about counselling therapies, it's about CBT therapies, and these things cannot be treated within a week or two. These require a sustained approach in terms of its management.
And do you think that sustained approach is possible when almost crackdowns and curfews become a regular thing? I mean, how important is regular treatment in this regard when you have an issue? And how important is for you to actually have access to those resources on a daily basis?
I think it's incredibly important. I mean, I know certainly in my practice, when I see patients for, let's say, psychosis or depression, the waiting list for counselling therapies can be a number of weeks. And it can be very scary for us, and especially the patient, because they have no point of support, no direct contact for support. So actually having these extra facilities in place, because a lot of people tend to assume that these mental health illnesses can simply be fixed by a pill. And that's certainly not the case, and people need to be able to support one another, direct them to the correct kind of therapies. And I think counselling and just having extra support, because a lot of these people would have lost friends and families, dear ones. They don't have anybody to lean to. They don't have anybody to listen to.
And of course, all of that gets more and more disrupted, as you're mentioning. In normal conditions, it's so difficult for these patients. What happens when you're in these abnormal conditions, when there is violence all around you? On that note, thank you so much, Dr. Sonya Saleem, for joining us from London. We're also joined by Shaista Safi, an activist joining us from London. Thank you so much, Ms. Safi, for joining us. Now, the last time you were on this show, you were talking about the fact that you were not able to connect to your family because there was no way to do so. Since then, have you heard any update on the on-ground situation in Kashmir, especially in regards to your own family?
Yes, it's now 16th day since we haven't heard directly from our family. We are getting indirect messages that your family is fine, they're alive, and why we are worried, why we are so much worried about their well-being is because we know that even under that special status that India had given to Kashmiris, we saw how our women, how our children, how our girls were not safe even at their home. We saw in Shah Mushtaq, she was showered with pellets while she was sitting inside her home. She was sitting in her kitchen. We saw that Hiba, just 18 months old baby, she was showered with pellets while she was in the lap of her mother. We have heard the stories of Asya and Nilofer while they were in their apple orchard and they were gang raped there. If you are married in Kashmir, you are not safe. Like Mubina, the lady, the just 25 years old woman who was raped on her wedding day. these are stories like Saira Bano. That there are numerous number of ladies we have heard about. They were raped in Indian occupied Kashmir because India uses rape as a weapon of war. We have seen that, we have heard that. There are a lot of reports about that India has used rape as a weapon of war. And we are talking about the highest militarized zone on earth right now. And with more additional forces now deployed in Indian occupied Kashmir, we fear that now when this special status is gone, they have all the impunity, they have all the free hand, they have all the immunity to kill Kashmiris, to create a genocide there, to just mass rape the women there. And we have heard about what BJP leadership is saying about
and Ms. Safi, on that point, what the BJP leadership is saying about the women in Kashmir, there's a clear objectification of them, fetishizing on them. Now, tell us how this has persisted, not just now, but even before, and how that has caused systematic violence directed towards these women.
Like I mentioned before, how can we Kashmiris and how can anyone forget what happened in Kunan Bhojpura, the two villages where 53 women were raped from the age of 8 years old girl to the 80 years old of grandmother, and they were raped in front of their family. How can we forget about the ladies or the girls who were raped on their wedding days? How can we forget about Saira Bano, who was raped on the 6th day of her wedding? There are numerous cases.
And with all of this, did any of these women ever get any justice?
Those women who came out on the roads for the resistance, they came out on the road to show how they are resilient. Then their hair was chopped to create that fear amongst them, to instill that terror amongst them, so they don't come out on the roads and they don't protest. We have seen all of these tactics India has used, and India has used these tactics on women as well. As earlier, the doctor on your program, she was saying that how this leads to the depression. We all must, and your viewers must read the report of Doctors Without Border, who have concluded in their report that 50% of the Kashmiri women and 37% of the Kashmiri men are likely to have depression, and 36% of the women and 22% of the men are they have anxiety disorders, and 22% of women of Kashmir and 18% of men in Kashmir, they have those post-traumatic stress disorders.
Safi, now just stay with me on that point. I go to Dr. Zia and talk to her specifically about the conditions of women. Now, we've talked about all aspects and how rape is being used as a weapon of war, and it's used to systematically create fear amongst the people. How can women be expected to cope in those conditions and to continue their lives normally? And what is happening in the Kashmiri case?
Well, we have to look at the last 30 years. And at this moment, when you ask me this question, I don't think we're just looking at this particular siege right now. So there are two ways to answer this question. One is that Kashmiri women are incredibly resilient, and that's what they have shown in the past 33 years. In fact, from 1947 onwards, and if you want to go beyond that, from 1931, if you want to formally see when the struggle started. So they have always been resilient. In case of the half widows, as we were talking about earlier, or any other, even when we talk about, rape victims, I don't want to name all of them, but we do have, as we have the panelists just spoke about the rape victims, and these rapes have been documented. Very recently, one of the rape victims, she was interviewed, and she wanted to come on she wanted to come into the public to the forefront and to speak of what happened to her. And when the reporter asked her whether she wanted her photograph to be used, she and her husband said yes, because she wanted her story to be noted, and she had no shame in relating this wrong that had been committed to her. And even the women of Kunan Bhojpura, the twin villages where mass rapes took place. Those women, they also talk about them being just living martyrs. When we see people who are killed, whose lives, when they give their lives and when they sacrifice themselves for the nation as men, they're seen as martyrs. These women are saying that this has happened to us on the name of our nation, so we are living martyrs. So there's one side to it that these women
Dr.
are very
Zia, hold on to that. I want to introduce another guest joined us, TK Rajlakshami. Now, Rajlakshami, while we're talking about all of this, let's talk about how the growth of a society as a whole in Kashmir has stunted over the years because of all of this that is happening. Violence, mental health, torture, the fact that an abnormal reality has become normal for kids, walking across barbed wires, getting stopped, getting checked, children fearing that their dads won't come home. How has that stunted the growth of the society?
Well, I think any kind of a situation that upsets the status quo, in a sense, would create a lot of social, in fact, displacement, as well as unrest, as well as the accompanying trauma, mental trauma associated with such drastic changes. Now, having said that, I think there is a dual responsibility on either sides of the border, right? To ensure that the situation there doesn't get out of hand worse. And yes, the greater responsibility.
But how can both parties on the border ensure that when India is acting unilaterally and has this very belligerent stance, what can be done to mediate and what can be done to protect the people?
Well, ultimately, one hopes that the situation is not escalated, beyond the point of no return, because ultimately it is the well-being of the Kashmiris that should be of paramount, importance to everybody concerned. And to that extent, I think there has to be a let's say a humanitarian approach to the whole issue. And things have happened. There have been certain drastic things that have being initiated, and those things should not be, let us say, escalated beyond a point. I mean, I wouldn't like to really comment on what, specifically what has happened. Everybody knows what has happened, so there's no point in going on,
But as you're talking about Ms. Rajlakshmi, and I take your point there, but as we're talking, we have heard that more than 4,000 people have been imprisoned. We're talking about the leaders, local leaders in Kashmir, they're under house arrest. So the situation is ongoing. While something did happen, there's also something that's unfolding. What do you foresee happening in the future?
So yes, clearly it is not a healthy sign that the political establishment should be, in fact, arrested and put behind bars. It is not a welcome sign at all. There should be, after all, a political solution to the whole issue. And several people, believe this, let us say on both sides of the border, if I may put it that way, that a political solution is what is required for that place. For Kashmir, and I think putting the political leadership, under house arrest and not allowing
a political solution is necessary for the situation that's ongoing. Thank you so much, Ms. TK Rajlakshmi, for joining us. Ms. Safi, just a last question to you now. As stated, a political solution is necessary. That's something that's being reiterated again and again. But do you see it going towards that? Talking about what's happening, the atrocities that are being carried out, it doesn't seem like there is space for political dialogue anymore.
Absolutely. We have seen what they have made Kashmir into. It's the largest militarized zone right now. More additional forces are deployed there. People are detained in their houses, no Eid prayers. We don't know about our relatives. We don't know either they are alive, they are dead, how they are living, or how they are surviving. If we believe what Indian media say, they show the empty roads and tell us that Kashmir is peaceful. This is not the story. This is not the reality. They are detained inside their homes. They are detained there. They are living in a continuous curfew. Imagine living 16 days without any communication, even to your neighbors. You don't know how they are doing. Are they alive or dead? So right now, talking about the political solution of Kashmir, and right now there is humanitarian crisis going on in Kashmir.
Right.
We are dead fair about our family. We have no communication with them. We see the pictures, we see some videos coming out, and we fear this might be my sister, this might be my brother there, this might be my relative or my neighbor standing and protesting. We know nothing about Kashmiris. We know nothing about, we hear our occupiers talk about our future, but we haven't heard from our Kashmiris, from our relatives, from the people on ground. We can imagine what Indian occupational forces can do to them with all the impunity, with all the draconian law, with the Armed Forces Special Power Act. We
Ms.
know
Safi,
and we have seen
we're going to have to end this on that note. Now, that's a very grim picture you're painting there, but it is the reality. There is an unfolding humanitarian crisis, and that's what needs urgent attention. On that note, I'd like to thank Ms. Shaista Safi for joining us from London and Dr. Ather Zia for talking to us from Colorado. Thank you both for joining the show. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again next week with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.